was given the topic to talk about that is about building bridges, not walls. And let me tell you that you could not have given me much more of a personal or difficult topic to speak on. I'm going to share some very personal things during this session, but I hope that they will be to your benefit as I share my testimony and also some concepts that I think are very important. So with that said, then let's get going on our topic. Bridges, not walls. One of those things invites you to stay out, and the other one invites you to come over. Bridges invite you to come over, and walls invite you to stay out. Let's talk about walls first. This is ancient Jericho. I found this online, this picture of ancient Jericho, and I was really intrigued to see that it had actually two sets of walls. The walls were meant to keep attackers out and to protect people and the water supply of Jericho. It was estimated by archaeologists that the ancient city of Jericho was built about 8,000 years before Christ. The walls at the very lowest are 4 meters tall. Now, if you think of the fact that I'm about maybe 1.5 meters or so, a little more than that, 4 meters is very tall. The watchtowers on these walls, and you see some watchtowers there, were about 28 feet tall, which would be about 9 meters tall. So these walls were meant to keep people out. Here is another set of walls. I think you can see my cursor here. This section right here was the city of David. It was a walled city of the Jebusites, and David came up into that city by going to a spring down below that they got their water from, but they were able to let down buckets from inside the city while keeping the gates shut and the walls very high, and to get their water from that spring. However, David and his buddies climbed up that shaft into the city and were able to take the city and made it into Jerusalem, his capital. They also brought the Ark of the Covenant to this walled city. It was very safe because it was up on a hillside. It actually is higher up than it looks in this picture of this model. And then in the time of Solomon, a temple, again, with very heavy, thick walls, was built right here next to the city of David, the original Jerusalem. This walkway here was the walkway by which people approached the temple. When you read in the Bible, it says Jesus and his disciples went up to Jerusalem. They went up this walkway. Then as the city grew more and more, they had to build more walls to keep the city safe. So you see different parts of the city walled in. And now, even today, you can see that there are walls between parts of the city because as the city expanded, walls were built. A completely different time, a completely different place. This is the Castle of Olavinlina. It's in Finland, where I was a student missionary when I was a college student. And this was built by a Swedish person called Olavi. So Olavinlina means the castle that belongs to Olavi. This was built during the time when, for a while, the Russians were taking over Finland, and then came from the other sides, the Swedes would take it over, and they were always taking this land away from each other. So this castle was built once again to keep people out. It had massive walls and ramparts that were made for cannons, built on an island, in fact, so there was no other way to reach it but by boat, which would mean that anyone trying to attack it would be very vulnerable. Nowadays, there's a bridge across which leads you right up to the castle with an open door, and you can go in. So the walls are no longer keeping anyone out. And in fact, this very white tent cover covers over an opera stage now, where they put on beautiful summer concerts. This is Castle Sant'Angelo, also originally known as Hadrian's Mausoleum in Rome. It was built about 130 years, this round tower was built about 130 years after Jesus, when the Roman emperor wanted to make a nice tomb for himself before he died. So he built this with the very heavy walls and the ramparts. basically just to guard his remains when he died. Eventually, it was taken over by the Christian church with the Pope as the head of the Christian church, and it was used by the popes as a fortress and as a castle. Again, the walls were built to keep people out. And much later, then a bridge was built across to bring people in. But originally, it was a secure place to keep people out. Now, I want to talk with you about a different kind of wall. In Malaysia, which is the country from which I come, there are in a part of the country buildings that are called longhouses. And they are built up on stilts so the animals can run underneath. And then up on top in the longhouses, there are apartments off of a common area, a long porch area. And so each family would live, and they're usually related to one another. Each family would live in one of these apartments where you see a door, but much of their family time is spent out in this common area. And in this common area, they thresh rice, they share meals together, they tell stories, they socialize, they have dances. It is the way of life of the longhouse that's a very communal way of living. We were going to take some students from my university in the US to go and visit a longhouse because this is not the way people live in the United States. Usually it's a real focus on a single family living by themselves, often not even with any extended family, just the father, the mother, and the children. And so it's a very insular way. And for our students to see what is it like when a whole community lives together, that was going to be a real opportunity. So we brought them to see this longhouse where many people at this longhouse were Adventists. When we got there, I was very disappointed to see that it was a concrete longhouse down on the ground because I had been expecting my students to see a longhouse that was up on stilts. But still, it was a very beautiful building. Inside, once again, you see that there was a long porch. This one was beautifully clean. You would have to take off your shoes at the door. And then you come into this common area where, once again, people are together. They socialize together there. When it's time to eat, they'll bring out the food from their kitchens and their apartments. They'll lay down mats on the floor, and then they'll sit and enjoy food together. In the evening, they have dances or tell stories, or the children play together, or whatever it might be. So this is a modern day longhouse then that they don't build above the ground. Well, we were approaching the longhouse when the Adventist pastor who was taking us there said he was very distressed. And as we listened to what he said, the story was such a sad one. Apparently, what had happened was the government had been giving out grants for development, and the chief of this longhouse had dispersed the money, but not the way the government intended. He dispersed the money only to relatives. And so some of the people in this longhouse, which had 80-some families in it, some of the people got some of the money and the other people got no money. And those who got the money were always treated better. The ones who were family were always treated better by their chief. Well, the other people in this case were really very unhappy about this, because that money they knew was given by the government to be a grant for development of the entire village, not just the chief and his relatives. And people got into disagreement, and eventually the ones who did get and the ones who didn't get were not even talking to one another. And it really took us a while to get all of this story out of them. They were upset, division began. And at one point then, when they were not talking to each other and not interacting anymore and very upset with one another, particularly the people who did not get were upset at those who were getting extra, they started building a wall. And it happened just before we came. So you can see the bags of cement here behind my husband, Dr. Jim, and they have bricked up the whole porch. So now no longer could the whole village get together in that long, long common area. They put a wall across it, and they were divided. They were a divided longhouse. It was the saddest story. The pastor was fit to be tied. He said, I have prayed with the people. I have listened to the people. I have talked. I have tried to help them work it out, and they will not work it out. And you know what made it even more difficult was that the head elder was the chief of the village. And so when your chief of the village is also the head elder of your church, the controversy not only stays within the longhouse, it comes to church with them. And it was a very difficult situation. Here you see the chief's family with the wall again in the background. There's a whole long section behind that you can't see because of the wall that was built up to keep the others out because of the division in the village. Some walls are built to protect people inside, but other walls are built to divide. In the United States, we have a saying that good fences make good neighbors. What it means is if you put a fence between your yard or your property and the next person's property, it helps you not to have arguments about which is mine and which is yours. So putting up a fence is a good thing there. Where I live at IS, we don't have fences between the houses. We sort of know where our yard finishes and the next person's yard begins, but we walk out into our backyard and chit chat with our neighbors or into the front yard. And the idea is we don't need a good fence to make good neighbors. What we need is good Christian community to make good neighbors. We don't need walls. So sometimes a fence is good and sometimes not. I want to introduce you or remind you of some other walls in this world. This is a picture of the Berlin Wall. When it was divided after World War II, a wall was put up and it was dividing social systems. It was dividing ideologies. You can see here that the person who took this picture wrote the word East in German on this side and West on this side. Look how drab and gray it looks over here. And on the west side, so much color. It was such a different society from East Germany to West Germany. I actually went there both before and after the wall fell and saw the difference. This was no man's land and people tried to escape here. There were guard towers and people would be shot if they tried to get across the wall from one side to the other. But they knew that life was much better on the far wall. Furthermore, that wall had been dividing families. In 1989, as openness was coming to the Soviet Union, the wall in Berlin fell and families were finally reunited. This was done because the people basically demanded that the wall fall. It was time for families to be reunited. And this was I think it was about 30 some years after the wall was built, maybe close to 40 years after it was built. And what an amazing reunion it was. But you know, when this wall fell, the West Germans, including friends of mine, had said, oh, it will be so wonderful to reunite. And we're going to bring these people in and we're all part of one people. And then they found that there were issues. Because as that wall had been there, people had grown in different directions. The East Germans had taken on an ideology that was different. They had taken on philosophy that was different. The next generation had been brought up without God at all or without connection to Western ideas. And the West side was much more connected to the rest of Europe, Britain and Netherlands and Belgium and some of these Western countries. So when these families who had been divided for so many years got back together, they didn't really get along so well. There were tensions, there were difficulties, because when you have a wall that divides people, and if it divides people for any length of time, those people's identity changes. Here's another wall that is happening right now. This is a wall that has been going up between the Israeli West Bank and the Jewish side. And we also saw this when we visited Bethlehem about 9 years ago. This wall had gone up to keep the Palestinians from coming and doing terrorist acts on the Jewish side. But it's not a very clear-cut situation because the Palestinians were there long before the Jewish people were there. Most of the Jewish people entered since 1948, since the end of World War II. For them, they were coming back to their ancestral home that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Palestinians have been there for thousands of years also. And as the Jewish people came back in and there were tensions between the people and there became violence because the Palestinians were getting things taken away from them and the Jewish people were having to defend themselves against the Arab countries going to war with them, it ended up with very hot tensions. Many Palestinians being Christian, many of the Jewish people either being observant Jewish or having no religion at all. And now this wall goes up to provide protection, but it also divides. It's the saddest thing to see this wall. It is the saddest thing to see a nation of God's children divided. This one is not a wall, but this is a demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea. Just yesterday, I was sitting in meetings with the Northern Asia Pacific Division, and they were talking about the ministry that they prepare for people who escape from North Korea and they come to South Korea. There are also families who have been divided by this division between the North and the South of the same people. The philosophies, again, are different. It's very similar to what happened in Germany. The society in the North is very much closed and doesn't have much in the way of riches, whereas the society on the South is very developed, has connections with the rest of the world, and has enough to eat. Just that much makes a difference. And so you have this zone that some people have said a wall is going in there, but most countries are saying, no, there's not a wall there. And it's kind of hard to see because there's this rather wide no man's land that has been demarcated between North Korea and South Korea. But essentially, it works as a wall. Here's another wall that you may have read about in the news more recently when Donald Trump said that he would build a wall between the United States and Mexico. This wall was specifically, once again, to keep people out. On one side were people from Mexico who didn't have as much, and further afield from Mexico, they would come traveling across to try to get into the United States to have a chance at a better life. On the other side was North America, which has its own problems, but which is really quite a wealthy country. And there were issues, and then there were drug cartels and traffickers that were working across the border. And so Donald Trump said, we'll put up a wall. And he promised that wall. It is partially built, and you see a part of it here. But the idea, once again, was to keep some people out from where the other people are, and to keep a difference between those people. I found this very interesting graph. It says there are the number of separation barriers initiated, in other words, walls that have started to be built around the world from 1945 to 2014 are depicted here. And if you'll look at it, quite obviously, the number of walls is increasing, new walls that are being built between peoples for a certain reason. Some of the discussion that I was reading was saying that they are expecting more walls as refugees come into Europe and they're trying to keep the tide back of these refugees, and they don't know how to handle them all. They have tried, but there are many problems with trying to handle the refugees that come in from Africa and from Arabic countries. So they've been talking about walls there as well. In any case, look at that. In the 2000s, 17 new walls were started. In 2010 to 2014 alone, just half of the decade, 8 new walls were started. These are things that divide people. These are walls to keep people out, not people in, but to keep people out, to divide people. Joshua Cooper Ramos says, the walls, fences, and trenches of the modern world seem to be getting longer, more ambitious, and better defended in each passing year. And then there's a very interesting sentence that I found in the preamble to the UNESCO Constitution. It says, wars start in the minds of people, and therefore it is there that peace must be constructed. In other words, when we build walls, it's a war of sorts to keep someone out, and it starts in our minds, So if we're going to make peace, we have to start in our minds with making peace. I'd like to share with you a model that my husband first introduced me to, but he got it from one of his advisors as he was preparing to write his dissertation. And here's how it goes, because it explains a dynamic that happens that I think leads to walls. First of all, a threat happens. And the way that this lady introduced it, she said, let's say that a big angry cat comes and he sees a mouse. And so he goes on the attack to get the mouse. Now, what does the mouse do? The mouse gets very, very anxious. Oh no, very anxious. And so that anxiety then leads to action. And what is the action? When there's threat that causes anxiety, the mouse runs. That's the first defense that a mouse knows, run away. And the cat is after the mouse. But what if this mouse is a very special mouse, she says. And what if this mouse has a big bazooka and turns around and levels that bazooka at the cat and fires? Well, this week, I wish that had happened, because a little kitten that I've been taking care of, a big, nasty cat who I've never seen a cat do this before, but a big, nasty cat got into the house, not our house, but the house where the little kitten lives, got in there and attacked the kitten and slashed its throat. And it was obvious that our kitten Gideon had run as fast as he could, but the big cat had gotten him. And I really wish that little Gideon, instead of being attacked and pretty much close to murdered by the big cat, I wish he'd had a big bazooka, because my heart is really hurting for that cat, for the little cat. Gideon is still in the hospital right now, and we've been praying for his healing, because he's just the sweetest little kitty cat. But look back at this again and think of the times when you want to build a wall between you and someone else. Typically, it's because you felt threatened and you got anxious and upset and you needed a defense. And one defense is for you to run away from that person, and the other defense is to turn around and build a wall or to attack back. And so that's how walls get built, because someone is feeling threatened. In the case of the Longhouse, the people who did not get their share of the grant from the government were feeling threatened, because they knew if the chief would treat them unfairly this time, it was likely to happen again. And they just wanted some protection. So they put up their defense, and it was a wall. In the case of all the nations that I shared with you, there was something that was threatening to them. For example, in the West Bank of Israel, it was terrorism that was building, and so they put up a wall. But remember, once again, walls are meant to keep people out, and they end up dividing, and they end up sending peoples in two different directions. Let me share with you then why this is so personal for me, because walls create grief. And I want you to be able to apply this to situations in your own lives. I come from a missionary family, and in my family, I had two parents that were missionary doctors, and then my little brother. You see us right there. After we became adults, there was a rift that came up, actually within the last 20 years, between my brother and our father, and to some degree our mother as well, although not so much. It's very complicated, so I won't explain it all, except to say that I love my father dearly. And he's gone now, so is my mother. But even back then, loved my father dearly, loved my mother dearly, and loved my brother dearly. And when I became aware that my brother was distancing himself, putting a rift or a wall between himself and my father, where he would not even be in the same place with him, it was very, very hard for me. It was hard because my brother has always been the closest one to me. And I've loved him more than anybody else until I met my husband. And I certainly understood why my brother felt the need to distance. However, I also loved my father and my mother, and I did not have the issues that my brother did, even though I understood his issues. So now I was caught in the middle. And one of the things that my brother had said to me, I remember it very clearly when he said, I don't want you to be caught in the middle. These are choices that I'm making for myself. Well, you know what? It's impossible not to catch someone in the middle. And it's particularly more difficult when the spouses get involved as well. My brother was married, I was married, And I won't go into details about that, except to say that my husband has been a wonderful person standing beside me through all of this, but also keeping me very balanced. And so there was this division in our family. And there were many tears on my part as I thought, my brother will not be in the same place with my father, and rarely does he see my mother, and he demands that my dad is not there when he sees her. And I understand that, but I'm never going to be in the same room with my whole family ever again. And I loved every one of them ever so much dearly. So it was a very difficult thing. I'll get back to that later, but I want to share with you some things that have come from researchers who have talked about building walls. Dr. Van Langenhove, who is from Brussels, says building walls has perverse effects. It limits cross-border dialogue, or it even makes it impossible. And so it gives free space to the ones on the other side without the possibility to influence their thinking or acting. At this time that this happened, my parents were in their 80s, and I was doing a lot of support for them because they were getting older. And it was just a very difficult situation. So because I was having to support them, I couldn't be with my brother as much because he had put this space in between him and my father. And now what you have is you have a wall between us, whether we put it there or not. The wall is there. And then we seem to be going different directions. And that was what I felt was happening, where I used to be able to talk with my dear, sweet brother, and he would always understand what I was saying, and we didn't get into conflicts. We were best of friends. It didn't seem to work like that anymore because it says it limits cross-border dialogue or even makes it impossible. And then each one goes their own way without the possibility to influence the other one's thinking or acting. Walls have a perverse effect on human beings. Dr. Langenhove also says that identity can thus be seen as a function of the many divides available in society, as well as upon the availability of occasions for expressing their relevance in accounting for or justifying behaviors or events. Who do I belong with? Do I belong with the Palestinians or do I belong with the Jewish side? This becomes an identity issue when you have to take sides. Who do I belong with? This half of my family or that half of my family? And how I figure out my identity then influences my behavior. How my brother figures out his identity influences his behavior. And it can send us in different directions, and it can cause behaviors that we don't understand in one another. Building walls has perverse effects, and it is related to our identity that we build as we accommodate those walls. Now, just want to talk for a moment. It's a little bit of a side route, but I want to talk about windows and walls because I think it's an interesting concept. And I would like to explore it more, but I just saw a little indication about it. Professor van Langenhove also said, walls do not facilitate dialogue. Well, of course, we know that. When there's a wall between us, we don't talk. And in fact, the fact that the Berlin Wall is not here anymore is thanks to all who have put windows in the wall. Windows are the symbols of seeing each other and the possibility to talk. In every wall, I believe, you can find a window. Something where you can talk to one another, you can make a connection, and maybe from there you can work to get the wall to fall. This is what happened with the Berlin Wall. People were able to get messaging across from one side to the other. Things started to change. They started to see things differently. When you can find a window in the wall, you can start to work to get that wall to fall. Joseph Fort Newton said it very clearly, and this is a bridge that Dr. Jim and I have walked across over a river in Oregon State, a beautiful bridge, but it exemplifies very clearly what a bridge does. A bridge, as opposed to a wall divides, a bridge connects. It connects one side to the other. in the straightest possible way. Nowadays, there are some designers of bridges who put some curves in them because people's eyes particularly enjoy curves. But really what a bridge is there to do is to connect this side with this side. What a wall is to do is to divide this side from this side. And Joseph Fort Newton says it very clearly. Men build too many walls and not enough bridges. So I want to focus us now for a while on building bridges. I'm going to use pictures of my brother and me from when we were growing up just as illustrations, but I want to share with you some strategies, I think, where you can start moving from having walls to find windows in that wall to where you can make the wall come down. You can build a bridge. You can make a connection from one side to the other side. You don't need to accept that wall in your longhouse. You don't need to accept that wall across your country, and you certainly do not need to accept that wall in your family. There are ways to get past that. Oh, and let me say, you don't need to accept a wall between people in your church either. So what are my tips? One is commit to love as your reason. During the time when there was so much stress in my family, and that has gone now, during the time when there was so much stress in my family of origin, it would always come back to, but I love my brother. But I love my brother. You know, it's very easy to cast somebody aside or to build a wall. And our knee-jerk reaction because of the Tad dynamic, there's a threat. My family is being divided. There's anxiety. Oh no, I can't be with my brother and my parents at the same time. There's defense. My defense, what I wanted to do, at sometimes it got so hard for me, I thought, I don't want to go see my brother. In fact, I remember him inviting my husband and me to come see him. And I would say to Dr. Jim, I don't want to go. I always feel terrible when I go. This is so difficult when I go. And Dr. Jim would always say, don't stop the connection. Always keep the connections. Keep your door open. Don't close the door. This is what a good spouse should do. They should always encourage you to stay open and to behave righteously. So commit to love as your reason. The thing that always came back to me is I love my brother dearly. I have always loved him dearly. Whatever else exists in this situation, we cannot allow a wall to exist. Another strategy in building bridges is to avoid collateral damage. When two people in a family or two people in a church or two people in an organization become at odds and start building walls, never does that affect only them. Never. It always affects everyone around them. This is the thing I think my brother didn't understand. As much as I love him and as wise as he is, he didn't understand that the actions he started taking were going to separate him and me. And then I think he didn't quite know how to deal with it after that because he was so committed to the direction that he was going. But here's a picture of our extended family in the Netherlands, where my father was from. And if you look at all of those people, there were divisions to deal with because of people who had walls built or had difficulties, and certainly in my family. So you need to think about when you start to be tempted to build a wall or to put a space, such as there is between North Korea and South Korea, put a space between you, there will always be other people around you who are hurt. They will feel like they have to take sides. They will say things and then worry that they have offended you or that they might offend you, and they won't say something they need to say because they feel like they'll offend someone or the other. I said to my husband one time, I feel like I'm walking barefoot on broken glass because I just everywhere I step, I could cause a mess. And that's what happens with the people around you. So you can never think that my actions to build a wall between me and someone else will not damage everyone around me. They will damage people around you. So avoid that. Another one that you can do is to reduce the tension by widening your circle. And I thought I would use a picture here of my brother and me with our friends in Thailand when we were growing up. They were Filipino missionary kids. And we grew up as best friends together. You know, when you surround yourself with other people, you don't just focus on the two people who have the most tension. And so it can be very helpful. When my brother and I would be in a group, that was a larger group, it wasn't as tense because there were other people. We could widen the circle. So if you find yourself in a tense situation with someone else, widen the circle, bring others in. Oh, and I should mention too, that there were tensions that grew up between me and my father because I could see how he was not peacemaking with my brother. And so there were times when I needed to widen the circle around my father as well. It couldn't be just me and him because we would get into an argument. And it's really not a good idea to get into an argument with an 80-year-old man. It's just not good. I would say skip it. Another thing that you can do to build bridges is share in doing a project together. When you have something in common, something that you have a goal with together, it's something that can reduce the space between you and help you to become a team again. That can be very, very helpful. Do both of you, let's say that you're in a marriage and both of you are just really tense with each other right now and you want to build a wall between the two of you. Okay, stop and think. Can we do something that we mutually like to do as a project together? That might help us to reduce our tensions and it might help us to build bridges back to each other again. Sometimes just time helps while you're working on something together. Look for humor and play. There are a lot of jokes that my brother and I share from having grown up together. And during those times when things were so tense, suddenly I start talking with the Malaysian English and then I talk with my brother like this, and then we would burst out laughing because we would bring up the pidgin English that we learned as kids and we would use it with each other. We had play, we had humor, and we could go back to that. And suddenly when you put humor and play into a tight situation, you're not building walls anymore. You're building bridges, you're laughing, you're making connections. It can be a very good thing for reconnecting with somebody. Sometimes, to be quite honest, putting some healthy space between you helps. I remember when my brother and I were traveling with my parents, we would go to the US on a vacation from where we were missionaries, and we would be in the back seat of the car. And I would say to my brother, don't you put your finger, this is when we were little, don't even put your finger over that line on the car seat because this side is my side and that side is your side. It was effectively a wall. And my mother would turn around and say, Casey, you sit on that corner, and Ginger, you sit on that corner. And she'd put some space between us. And putting some space between us, some healthy space, could help us in just sort of getting our equilibrium again and building bridges with one another. Sometimes, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in a working relationship, whether it's in a church relationship, you've just been together a little bit too much. And maybe you need to take a little vacation, not a long one, little vacation, just get some space, let your tension go away. You can come back and build bridges once you do that. By the way, I would like to tell you that sleep is a wonderful, healthy space. There are times when the pressures build up and you go to bed and you sleep on it and you get up in the morning and the sun has come up and the birds are singing. It's a new day. Breakfast tastes good. And you're like, okay, I think I can do this. I can maintain openness to other people still for a little bit longer. I think this is my last tip for building bridges, but stay connected for the sake of someone you both love. When things were tense with my brother and me, we both dearly loved our mother. And we would get together with our mom. And even though I missed having my dad there, there was no way that I would do or say anything to make this time with my mom any less fun for her. And because she has Alzheimer's at that time, she really, she kind of wondered where my dad was, but she didn't really think about it. But she really enjoyed being with us. She knew she loved us, even if she didn't know who we were. And so we could stay connected to one another for the sake of my mom. And that was something that was very valuable. In church, who is it when you have a tension with one another? Who is it that binds you together? Somebody that you both love, that you will stay connected for the sake of that person. Well, of course, it's Jesus Christ. You both love Jesus, right? You're both Christians, right? You're both the children of God, right? You both love God. Even if you act nasty to each other now and then, stay connected for the sake of Jesus Christ. Stay connected for the sake of your Heavenly Father. You're both His children. You know, when children get at odds with one another, it hurts their parents as well. And so that's the way God feels about us. Stay connected for the sake of someone that you both love. And by the way, when it's parents who are at odds with each other, they still both love their children. So trying to rebuild those bridges and stay connected for the sake of your children is a valid way to do things. I love this verse. In Ephesians 2:14, for He Himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. To me, this is a promise of where to look. Look to Jesus as you take down your walls, as you look for that window to find commonalities with somebody, as you get ready to break down the walls of hostility. He is the one who is your peace. He has made the two groups one, the two people one, the family one. He's destroyed the barrier and the dividing wall of hostility. At the very end of my dad's life, my brother showed up. And I was so grateful because not only do I think my dad knew my brother was there, but I knew my brother was there with my dad and with me. My mom was gone by that time, but I knew he was there. And when my dad was dying, we were both there with my dad. I can't tell you how precious that is. It was not me who took down that wall. It was Jesus who took down that wall. And my brother is a very dear person who loves Jesus. I don't know what work went on in his heart that brought him there, even after the ways that my dad had treated him, even after the decisions that he had made. But we were all together. And that is a very, very precious thing to me. Somehow he found a window. He was able to break down that wall. He was able to build the bridge. He was able to be there. And it meant the world to me. So my question to you is, can you build a bridge? Is there somebody that you need to reunite with? Can you be the person who stays open, doesn't shut down, doesn't leave, doesn't pull out your bazooka and fire back, but you stay there and stay open and make the connection? And can you do that for the sake of Jesus, who you love? I would invite you to do that. Let me finish with the chapter I think that has the most effect. If we really take it in and we make it part of our souls, it allows us, it empowers us to build bridges and not walls. And even though you know it well, I'm going to read through it so that we can all hear the words yet again and recommit to these words. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Remember, building bridges, commit to the love. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, if I'm right, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. There's no bridge there if you don't have love. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Oh, that one is so hard for so many of us. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. It always looks for the window. It always insists on building the bridge. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Childhood, let me remind you, is when justice is more important than love. That's how children's development works. Justice is more important than love. But now it's time to put that aside. It's time to find the window and love despite the things that have bothered you. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror, and then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And this is the part of the challenging grace, that God is constantly growing you, giving his grace to you so that you can be the kind of person who builds bridges. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Let me finish by reminding you, there will be no walls to divide people in heaven. So why don't you practice staying open now? Thank you.